St. John's Episcopal Church, Mount Pleasant, Tennessee, the final resting place for pioneering psychologist Susan Walton Gray. The Susan Gray School at Vanderbilt University. Today, we take it for granted. Kids age 5, 4, even younger, being taught in the classroom. It's called early childhood education. And forget what you've heard. It works.
Study after study shows that the sooner a child begins learning, the better he or she does down the road.
Everything in early childhood can be a learning opportunity, and we try to maximize on all those moments of learning opportunities here at Susan Gray.
Here is a group on the first day.
A few generations back, the whole idea of early childhood education was laughed at. But today, thanks to the work of Susan Gray, a Vanderbilt Peabody College psychologist, we now know that virtually all children can benefit, including those with disabilities. Who was Susan Gray?
She was quiet.
She was a presence.
She was reserved.
She was scary.
She had a will made out of forged steel.
It was in the early 1900s that Susan Gray's father, Daniel Roger Gray, and mother, Elizabeth Wolfenden Gray, moved next door to this family-owned blast furnace in rural Rockdale, Tennessee.
Much of Uncle Jeff's steel output went into axles.
The task was to make a stronger grade of steel using a process patented by Susan's soon-to-be rich uncle, Jeff Gray.
He was a supplier to Henry Ford. Henry Ford is on the far right, and Uncle Jeff is in the middle.
While Susan's Uncle Jeff was hanging out with auto industrialist Henry Ford, her father stayed home to run the blast furnace and raise a family. That's Susan at age 5. And age 7, around the time she had a dream about her mother.
And when I woke up, I felt I'd like to scratch your eyes out. And I kept telling myself, now that's not really so, you just dreamed. But the emotion was still there, and I remember it still.
She was the middle child, born in 1913. Sister Virginia was the oldest. Brother Dan Jr., the youngest. All 3 children would do well in college.
Aunt Sue and Aunt Virginia were valedictorians at Randolph-Macon, and Dad was valedictorian at the University of the South.
In the mid-20s, the blast furnace was sold, and Susan and her family moved to this 232-acre farm in the nearby town of Mount Pleasant. Life had been good to the Gray family. A generation later, Susan Gray would find a way to pay it back.
I found psychology rather interesting, and so I went up to Peabody and took a quarters of graduate work.
She was a woman in a male-dominated field, and it was very male-dominated at this college, Peabody College, at that time.
Susan Gray received her M.A. in psychology from Peabody College in 1939, her Ph.D. in 1941, and in 1945 became the first woman to crash the stag party known as the Peabody Psychology Department. All of these accomplishments were just a prologue.
Right. Is that what your picture is about? The 3 what? There.
They were poor. They were black. Not only would they struggle in the classroom, tests of children up through 5th grade showed the longer they stayed in school, the worse they performed. And if you believed the conventional wisdom, there was nothing that could be done about it.
Yeah, because people believe IQ is immutable, it was unchangeable.
Then, along came Susan Gray. She would call her study the Early Training Project, and it would begin in the home.
She was among the very first, who discovered fundamentally that young disadvantaged children were not doing as well in school, in part because they were not receiving experiences at home that schools assumed all children entering school would have.
Susan Gray and her team ventured into the poorest of neighborhoods, reaching kids long before they enrolled in kindergarten.
The genius of Susan Gray was not to jump into 5th grade to work on the problem, but to go and work with 3-year-olds.
It was gutsy, too. At the time, nobody was sure 3-year-olds could be taught anything that would last. Susan Gray set out to prove you could educate children the so-called experts said could not learn, using methods the so-called experts said did not work. Not to worry.
The design of the study was held up as a model research design for studies of its kind, and it found
that if children in school settings got those experiences that they were missing at home, they would do much better in school, and that initial experience would set them off in a good direction.
Well, now look at it. Really look at it and feel it.
The early education model soon spread as researchers discovered that children with intellectual and developmental disabilities could also learn. It was none too soon.
It was not unusual for pediatricians to advise parents of newborn children with developmental disabilities to institutionalize them immediately before you have time to become attached.
A sympathetic teacher can work miracles with a withdrawn child.
Soon attitudes began to change as most realized
We should not throw children away simply because they are different. They have potential that the rest of us need.
Mr. Shriver, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests.
Meanwhile, in Washington, Lyndon Johnson launched the War on Poverty.
We set out to make certain that poverty's children would not be forevermore poverty's captives. We called our program Project Head Start.
The man in charge of Head Start, Sergeant Shriver, was no stranger to Peabody College.
And during one visit, Sergeant Shriver saw the early training project. He always mentioned the work of Susan Gray as being the stimulus for Project Head Start.
Go Jim, the jungle Jim, the jungle Jim.
That's right. The research done by Susan Gray from Vanderbilt's Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee, was the inspiration for Head Start.
Essentially, Sue's work was Head Start. It created Head Start before Head Start was, I think, even envisioned.
Preschool classes are not new, but they are new for the children of poverty.
In 1965, its first year, 500,000 children enrolled in Head Start. Today, there are over 1 million kids in the program. But Susan Gray's legacy doesn't end there.
The Susan Gray School is an inclusive child care center where we have children with disabilities included into each of the classrooms.
The Susan Gray School at Vanderbilt University. Everything going on here can be traced back to Susan Gray and the early training project, teaching of kids once thought too young to learn, and in the ongoing research projects conducted on site.
Initiation.
It's all part of Susan Gray's legacy, a legacy of hope.
So that's what drew me to this field, is just a way to try and help them adjust despite their differences.
Do you need some help?
And if Susan Gray were to materialize in this room today, what would Kirsten Kinder say to her?
I'd say thank you. I would say thank you for pioneering through what I'm sure you had a lot of opposition against, and just for knowing that this was going to be worthwhile. And I would say I hope that we've done you proud.